Hello, everyone, and thanks for your patience. We were dealing with some technical difficulties. I think the spirits were just guiding us and reminding us that we all just needed an opportunity to breathe together before we started. I want to welcome you. My name is Janie Lauzon. I'm a Métis multidisciplinary artist, and this is our Indigenous panel, Ndo-Mshkawgaabwimi. We are all standing strong, or we are standing strong. I want to start by turning things over to our elder, Liz Stevens, for her opening the circle and her guidance for all of us as we move through this discussion together. Liz?
Miigwech. Tam Ngakid. First I'll say, Elizabeth Stevens, Shagnashim knows win awun. My English name is Elizabeth Stevens. Misa Onind Bagakwajin Kango. Others call me by Bogakwa, which is a name in Ndo-Mshkawgaabwimi. Ojibwe Minwabudewa Adamikwe Ndao. I am from that bloodline, and Misum Megwa Mompi Wilkwadung Do de Bendagos. So my lineage is from the Potawatomi, as they call it in English today, as well as the Ojibwe, and I currently reside in Wilkwadung, otherwise known as Kettle Point. And so I welcome you as well, and Dodopnago, I welcome you and pick you up in a good way today as you're joining us. And I went this morning to ask for the Creator to give us the direction and the wisdom to know what we would like to share today. And so the Creator, we had prayers this morning in preparation. We used the Sama and we used the Sage. Each and every panelist have in their own way as well prepared to share, to give voice to that inner person that we all have within us. And today we're wishing to let you see what that looks like behind our eyeballs. The grandmothers and the grandfathers also that are always with us, I've asked them to be with us as well. And the four directions and all of those good spirits and all those four directions will be listening to us. And they've been invited to give us that support. I'd like to also thank and be very grateful to the directors and the board of directors, the organization of Stratford Festival, who have shown their willingness to work with the Indigenous artists on the panel and all of those other artists that have worked. And so they also are included in that time we talk in Invocation. So we wish everyone who is going to be participating to be helped in a good way. And that when we finish, we have the word Mwakawin, which is wisdom. And we want everyone to have the wisdom and the strength to open up and remember that we're all wearing our cultural lenses as we walk around every day. If you would be so kind maybe to remove them today and to open up your ears and listen to the spirit of the message and what is being shared. And because it affects the future of our land. And this is what we want to work on, preparing a good place for all of the diversity and the situations that we as human beings, as Anishinaabe, as Haudenosaunee, as all of the First Nations experience as we walk with those who have joined our ancestral lands to share in our dish. We're all a party and responsible as participants to share our knowledge, and we're taking that opportunity today. And so we have asked for all those, in a good way, the Creator, grandfathers, and the good spirits to walk with us today. And as we now open up our hearts and our thoughts and our minds in a good way. Miigwech.
Thank you so much, Liz, for all of your guidance throughout the process in terms of helping us prepare for this panel as well. It's truly an honor and really important for us to have you here. Great. I'd like to start by saying that we are a panel of 7, and Liz is our elder, making us 8. 7 is a number in some of our nations that is a sacred number. We're also very, very aware that this group that have gathered today do not represent all of our voices to any degree. We understand and realize that our Inuit brothers and sisters and artistic community are not a part of this particular panel. We understand that our designers, our dancers, members of our Quebec community, our Manitoba community, and so on are not a part of this panel today. We wanted to ensure that our point of view in terms of the panel moving forward is that this is not the end of the conversation. This is a continuation of a conversation that has started many, many, many years ago by many, many people prior to our engagement with the industry. We walk on the shoulders, we are carried on the shoulders of those who have come before us, and there will be many following us. So it's really important that everyone listening really understand that the voices in this particular circle do not represent our entire community at all. We're very aware of that. We also do not speak for the entire community. We are hoping to bring forward our personal perspectives, our personal stories, our personal ideas that will lend to the bigger conversation that will hopefully grow out of this. And so we want to thank all of the other members of our communities who are not here speaking on this panel. We do encourage you all to go to Twitter and social media, where some of those voices have been very strong yesterday and will continue today. We encourage you to go to the Stratford Facebook page, where many of our Indigenous artists who have worked in some capacity with Stratford are being honored and profiled. Some amazing faces that you'll see there. Share all of that information, retweet, and if you can, please hashtag Decolonizing. And if you have questions that you would like a further circle to address and answer, our email address is stagingourtruth@gmail.com. One of the things that I wanted to quickly share is that there was a circle of people who helped to create the panel, who guided the decision-making process, and that was Kat McLean, Tara Skye, Michaela Washburn, Gordon White, Stephanie Caribou, Jessica Carmichael, Wasandio Kirby, along with myself as a moderator today of the panel. This was an incredible group of people who've worked very hard over the last week to try to pull off what is an incredible feat within the short days that we've had, along with the staff and support that we've had at Stratford, which has been immense. I want to start by turning things over to the panel to do a brief introduction, and then we're going to jump right into the conversation because we feel that that's what you've come to hear. Sorry, before I do that, I have asked Stratford to post a link in the chat that will allow you to see and look at, if you are non-Indigenous, you are unaware, to allow you to look at the location that you are coming from in Canada, if you're joining us from Canada, to see, in fact, whose traditional territory you are on. I encourage you to inform yourself about that. If you are joining us from around the world, I would also encourage you to discover, research, find out whose traditional land you are on, or the Indigenous people from your area. So I'll turn to the panel now. Lisa, could you start with an introduction?
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming. Gwe me Delaware. My name is Lisa Nason, and I'm an actor with the Stratford Company. I was in the Birmingham Conservatory for the 2019-2020 year. And yeah, I'm very honored to be here along with all these beautiful artists that I see right in front of me. So thank you for coming.
Excellent. Thank you, Lisa. Jessica, could you introduce yourself to the world?
Kwai, hello, bonjour, everyone. I'm an artist of Abenaki and Euro heritage. My heritage connects me to the Abenaki people of Quebec and New England, known as people of the Dawnlands, people from where the sun rises, people from the east. And I live in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, Montreal, where the Ganyaga Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today here in Montreal. And I am a dramaturge and director in practice, which are some of the practices that connect me to the Stratford Festival. And I'm happy to be here. Ndo-Mshkawgaabwimi, which I'm learning in my language, means I'm healthy. And I hope Colonial, that you're all healthy too.
Thank you, Jessica. Gordon?
Gwe Walalan. My name is Gordon Patrick White. I'm of the Mi'kmaq First Nation from Flat Bay, Newfoundland. I feel very ill prepared to talk about anything that we're going to be talking about right now, but I'm an actor. I've been an actor for more years than I care to mention, and I've been working here at the Stratford Festival right now for the last 4 years. This would have been my 4th year at the company. I'm currently staying in Stratford, and in this time when we are all staying in different places that we may not originally be from. So I just want to say I hope that everyone is okay and taking care of themselves as best they can. Well,
Thank you, Gordon. Wilimia?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Wilimia Sparrow. I'm from the Musqueam Nation. Sklits Teshlimith Humusqueam Mutsteoch Amit Sep Katwilam. And that just means with my Musqueam people, I invite you into our longhouse. And it's my honor to be able to represent my people in the Musqueam Nation on this panel. I am an actor and a writer and a director. Most of my writing is land-based and is about reclamation of place names and of our land, and revitalizing story from the Musqueam Nation. So Haichka, thank you so much.
Thank you, Wilimia. Cole?
Ani, my name's Cole Alvis, and my masculine and feminine spirits are coming from the Turtle Mountains, which are in southern Manitoba and northern North Dakota. The Métis, Chippewa, and Irish and English parts of my spirits are here, and I am grateful to be invited to be on this panel. I'm a director of a production called Bug by Yolanda Bonnell, and we were programmed to be presented later this year. And I'm grateful to connect with all of you and to do what we can to shine a light on Indigenous artists here at Stratford and beyond. Miigwech.
Thank you, Cole. And Dean?
Annie, bonjour, merci. My heritage is Red River Métis, Scottish French. I'm a descendant of Marie Anne Gabory, which becomes important because she was also Louis Riel's grandmother. My people come through Saskatchewan and Alberta to Parkdale, Toronto in the 1940s, and it was a clan. The whole kind of Gabory clan descended on Parkdale and became a clan within Parkdale. I myself was born in Weston and grew up in Rexdale. I came to Stratford through independent theater in Toronto with the Acme Theatre Company and then a company called The Co. All attempted to be ensemble companies, again, family, the greater family, the smaller family. And I have been looking at ensemble companies around the world and kind of spending time with them. So One Yellow Rabbit and Soul Pepper, Howard Barker's company in Europe, and the Steppenwolf in Chicago. And I was invited here in the fall of 2000 to work in 2001 as an assistant director and director. I stayed on for the 50th anniversary 2002 season in casting and new play development. And then I was again assistant director to then artistic director Richard Minette. And I directed Bereaved of Light by Ian Ross, which was the first play produced by the festival, written by an Indigenous playwright, which was an extreme honor. And then in the fall of 2002, Richard sent myself and another younger director over to England to take a directing Shakespeare module, which becomes important later on in the story. I've left Stratford and been there on and off. The last time I was here was from 2008 to 2012 as an assistant artistic director and then associate artistic director. I'm extremely honored and somewhat nervous to be a member of this circle. It is truly such a privilege. Merci.
Thank you, Dean. So sorry, Lisa, I'm just going to add one more thing, and that is just wanted to say to all of you that these incredible artists that you see in front of you on these squares, we've decided that somebody in Zoom needs to create a new format so that instead of the squares, you can actually have a circle format, but that'll require some coder at Zoom to actually accomplish that. But all of these artists were chosen to be on the panel because they were all in the process of engaging in work during the 2020 season, with the exception of Dean, who comes with an incredible history, as you've heard, in terms of an intersection with Stratford, the longest intersection with Stratford that an Indigenous artist has had. So those are the reasons why you're seeing who you see in front of you today. Lisa?
Yes, I just wanted to mention, I totally forgot to mention where I was from. So I am Mi'kmaq from Millbrook First Nation, Nova Scotia, Mi'kmaqi territory.
Great, thank you. We're going to jump right into the conversation because there's so much to discuss and so many interesting points of view that you'll have an opportunity to experience today. So I want to talk first of all about celebrating our unique ways of working. I realize that there's so many things that we can talk about that aren't working, but I thought it would be really lovely just to start with the fact that Indigenous culture is embedded into our Indigenous artistic practices. And in many of our languages, there is no real specific word for artist. We are and were multidisciplinary before it became a buzzword at Canada Council in 1977. So I'd love to just turn over to the panel to say, what are some of the things that you love about how First Nations, Métis, and Inuit artists think and create? And obviously, I understand there's no Inuit artists here to speak to that directly, but there will be further discussion about that later. So, Wilimia, would you like to start? I know you.
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to. I love talking about this sort of thing. It's my passion and my life. For me, it's always been really steeped in a cultural practice and a cultural exploration, because what I didn't know about my land, I learned through my art practice. So it's me figuring out who I am and making those connections stronger, those tenuous connections stronger, and then sharing it with the world and being like, hello, everybody in Vancouver. I'm really glad that I never even said the word Vancouver in my introduction. It's like, I'm from the Musqueam Nation, go figure out where that is. So it's a practice for me to dive deep into my grandparents' teachings, the teachings of the land, to figure out the place names, to figure out the stories, and then to share it with all of Vancouver so they can actually know where they stand. So that's the beginning of the practice for me.
Great. Lisa, would you mind jumping in? I think you have a wonderful way of expressing sort of how Indigenous culture is embedded in an artistic practice.
Right. Yeah. Well, I guess what I would like to touch on is just kind of the same thing where I grew up in Nova Scotia, and that was my land and that was my home. And then I had to move to Toronto to continue working as an actor. But because of that process of being an Indigenous actor and finding a lot of other Indigenous artists to work with, it made me kind of forced me to unfold my own culture and what that means, and kind of these two things of being an artist and my indigeneity kind of came together. So I found that inspiration that I've always known from the land, being a little girl, being in the woods, and kind of speaking to all of these trees and speaking to the land and honoring it also plays a really important part in my work. Also, with family as well, with our Indigenous culture within our family, we're all laughing, telling stories, we're all storytellers. And I think I kind of was the representation for that in my own family to kind of spread that to all nations. And it's something very proud of. And I'm very grateful for the journey that I've been on and the journey that I continue to go on.
Thank you, Lisa. Jessica, can you talk a little bit about, you have a wonderful way of describing what kind of relationship and energy you bring into the rehearsal hall that really is, I think, grounded in Indigenous practice or worldview. Would you mind talking a little bit about how you set up the room and the importance of relationship that you have when you're working, especially as a director?
Absolutely, Jenny. Yeah, it's so nice to hear Lisa and Lamia speak as well, because there's so much there I resonate with, especially, just for context that I had a lot of my heritage hidden from me when I was a child and didn't know a lot of things about, where I came from or our family history due to some internal racism. And yet always found myself in the woods underneath lilac trees and telling stories in the rain. And my father, as a social worker, really spent a lot of his entire life working in the Indigenous inner city in Edmonton and, sharing stories. And so that's been a big part of my life. And yet it's been very nomadic. So I've been thinking about that a lot when I enter rehearsal halls, about the nomadicness of people and the stories we bring with us, and reflecting upon that deeply and how that's embodied in each of us in different ways. And so when I'm, in a room in a leadership role, very much wanting to give space and even silence, because I think there's so much in silence to allow people, when we're setting up our relationships, to feel valued and heard. And that can mean, simply spending, a very long time doing exercises together in terms of embodying where you're from in a physical way, finding ways to make sure everyone is telling their stories and how they might connect to the story we're about to tell, and the audiences that they wish and hope might engage with us from their people, and how we might be able to do that outreach. So there's a lot of conversation that happens, as much as there's text work and character building work. I guess I could go into the minutiae a bit later, but I think it's always led with a place of really wanting to witness and make something of value between us as humans in the room. That really guides me when I'm working. And although I'm talking a lot right now, for me, it's about listening.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And I know, Gord, you have some thoughts on this too, but I'd like to turn it over to Cole. Do you have some thoughts? Because I know you work so deeply with Yolanda and the work that you guys create together. Would you like to speak a little bit about that process at all, or your focus when you're working in the room?
Sure, absolutely. It's been a real pleasure to get to know Yolanda through the work. We were paired through the Native Earth Wisegi Begins to Dance Festival They had me there in the room with her as dramaturg, and Bug is a piece that she had begun in theater school, a solo show project. And so while often when I'm engaged as a dramaturg or a director for Wisegi-Chak, it's script-based work and actors working off the page. Our first rehearsal, she had much of it off book, and we were moving together in the room. And so I immediately felt that there was something unique about her and this work. And that continued to grow as we were collaborating beyond Wisegi-Chak. We were very fortunate. Rhubarb as well as Luminato were quick to provide development support. And so our collaboration, the two of us, we were reflecting just today about this kind of cocoon that we created that was necessary for us to be safe, that as the support for the project continued and we received some funding and were able to bring in some designers and add to our team, there was an opening of that cocoon, and the care that we had learned that we require as a duo then was extended to those that we were bringing together. And I feel like that's an important aspect of perhaps why we've been so fortunate to bring the show across Turtle Island and to continue to be in negotiations about how it can happen. We're speaking with FemFest this fall to see if it's possible, depending on what happens with this world. But what I think one of the things that speaks to our process and how it shows up in the work is the care that we hold for ourselves, for our creative team, and that we hope is extended particularly to the Indigenous women that are invited to see the show. Yolanda has very specific protocols around a welcoming of the Indigenous women that are in the audience, and a dedication that we've been doing before each performance for the last little while, because the stories that are embedded, the truths that are hard and challenging inside this work, we feel are necessary. And so in order to bring those truths to light, we're also often engaging a healer in the communities where we're going, so that they're on site in case anyone needs some support during the show. And this is a balance that we feel is important, that while naming hard truths, it's important to also care for the Indigenous people in the audience. And so that form of care, I think, is a through line or a thread that I appreciate in our work.
Thank you so much, Cole. Gord?
Only to say it's been a thought of mine for a long time that this idea of the artist and the artisan is such a Western idea, and it has done damage more than anything else of separating an artist from the community. I know people who are boat builders and live off the land who would never call themselves an artist, but are artists nonetheless, and you can't help but respect and acknowledge the work that they do. And I just see the separation as non-existent.
Thank you. I'm going to jump ahead to a next question for you all. So just to give it a bit of preface for our listening audience, in Canada in 1876, the Indian Act restricted Indigenous people's rights to cultural and spiritual ceremonies, gatherings, artistic expression, and in some of these instances, to do so was punishable by death. I want to read to you an excerpt from a report that was put together at the beginning of the development of the Canada Council, the Massey Levesque Royal Commission on the Arts in 1949 to 1951. So this is a partial part of this quote. The impact of the white man with his more advanced civilization and his infinitely superior techniques has resulted in the gradual destruction of the Indian way of life. The Indian arts thus survive only as ghosts or shadows of a dead society. They can never, it is said, regain real form or substance. Indians with creative talent should therefore develop it as other Canadians do, and should receive every encouragement for this purpose. But Indian arts, as such, cannot be revived. So my question to you is, how do you feel as individual artists, these government policies, these long-standing government policies, these points of view have resulted in your sense of belonging into a mainstream industry? And has that in any way created a struggle within you for taking our rightful place in the landscape of mainstream theater in Canada? So this has to do with safety versus unsafety. Should we even be here? Are artists afraid to even consider that we have the right to be on these stages? Yes, I'd love, Dean, would you mind starting us off with this conversation?
Yes, sure. My goodness, I'll take a dive.
Just a little question.
In my history, again, there's incredible internal racism, and our story, I will tell you a story that I guess best explains this. My family goes back to, that got into this industry through my great uncle, Fred Gabriel, who left Canada and went down to Hollywood and became the artistic brother of a fellow named Buster Keaton. And if you look at Fred's history, he's listed as technical director, or they basically co-created every stunt, everything. So he had a dream and he just went and did it. And that's really kind of the Gabriel history. Nobody was going to give it, so we took it. We just took it, and we didn't ask. And my father, Richard, kind of learning from that, became a pioneer, and that's in his obit in the Globe and Mail, a pioneer in Canadian film. And in 1978, his film, Three Card Monte, was in the Festival of Festivals with a film about Marianne Gabriel. And my father was contacted by his agent, who had been contacted by the Toronto Star. And she was like, hey man, is this true? Like, this could be, we can make a connection, and maybe, I don't know, get another interview or something. And it was the first time that one of the very first times, in 1978, so I was 13, that I witnessed my father have a panic attack, a complete panic attack, and hang up the phone and say to my mama, what do I do? What do I do? Because this internal racism from his mother of Scottish heritage, because she thought she was doing the best, and this is a very familiar story. Our people been killed. Louis' death had led to generations of toxic masculinity and addictions, and because everybody needed to prove that they were here and prove that they were men. My dad called his agent back, because he was also embarrassed because he couldn't speak French, because that had been lost. And he said, tell them no. And so you could imagine, as a 13-year-old boy, I could not imagine why we wouldn't be just as proud of this history. And so I've always carried it. It's always been inside. It's always been my secret. And I share it with people I trust, and with a circle of, and always have. And so that tied into my time at Stratford. I didn't hide it. And I was extremely proud of it. But I had one person to kind of look to, which was Augie, and tried to find out everything I could find out about his time here, and all of the myth and all of the stories. And there's a lot. And then I found my people through a dear friend, Maxine Noel, and her family in the Indigenous Gallery here. So it's something that is still, to this day, I work on. I go back to the teachings, but this piece of it has affected generations and generations of my family.
Thank you so much for sharing, Dean. Lisa, would you, I know that you might have some thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, it's very interesting uh, because being in certain institutions where you are considered a minority, and I don't even like saying that word, but it's a word that is used. It is hard to specifically find your voice and take a stance on your voice because you're not all the time sure of what the reaction is going to be. Sometimes there is a reassuring nod, sometimes there's very curious questions about why you are in the room. Sometimes it's just she's here because she's worked really hard. But at the same time, it's the way that I work as an Indigenous artist is trying to find that balance between what we have offered to us as artists in this time. Also, but being an Indigenous artist in the room is very empowering because a lot of people would like to be in these rooms. A lot of other Indigenous artists would like to be in these rooms, and I am here, I am there, and so I have a duty and a responsibility that I'm very proud of. But at the same time, I still don't have all of the answers. I'm just doing what I like to do, and that's acting and thriving off of other artists and creating that family that has been lost.
Is there anyone else that would like to add? Jessica?
Yeah, it's funny, Willemia and I were talking last night on the phone before the panel, and then I talked to one of my classmates from National Theatre School, because I went there, and I used the word guilt with Willemia, and she was right in saying, like, it's such a loaded, hard word to talk about in this panel, and I was talking about how, because of coming, like Dean, like a lot of internal racism in my family, a lot of things I didn't know when I always knew I wanted to be a storyteller, but going to theater school, going to National Theatre School, that's really, I didn't share anything really. And, like, especially after my grandmother passed during the school year, which I don't think many people knew as well, a lot of things really came out in our family that were really hard about everything that had been suppressed. And it's been a long journey. And I've continued to do Western training during that training because I have felt that it's what I have to do to be seen. And I'm very proud of my training. I paid a lot of money for it and I'm in debt. So I'm happy to talk, put it out there that I've trained. But I also feel that sometimes I'm in rooms and I wonder if, that's why I'm there, because I was I certainly had to put myself through it, and I, fought to do that. But I also had middle-class parents. I wasn't living on a reserve. And I think about that a lot because I'm a university professor now, and about, people who can't come for training and or don't have that. And so they can't do a monologue, or they don't, or going to Stratford, that I was trained for a classical voice. So potentially I'm going to be chosen over someone else. And I really push against that, in the last 8-9 years of trying to look at my training and find the tension between that work, which I do value from teachers that I've really cared about, but also pushing against it with my heritage and connecting with other Indigenous people and their journeys, and trying to figure out how do we examine that in a room, and try and take, for me, what is guilt out of the way of being there. And I struggle with that a lot. Like, even coming to Stratford this year, I'm like, I don't think I deserve to be there. Do I? Someone else go. Janny, you direct it. You can take over the Red Sisters. I back and forth on that a lot. And yet I agree with Lisa. It's very empowering. And I've had a lot of people say to me, no, you should be here. You and even Willemia last night, we're here. Own that. And I want to. And then it's a struggle sometimes, for sure, still. And I think that is because of the system of, our government, and, so much pain and hurt that, even I still have not unpacked in my own personal life, because I don't know it. It's embedded in ways that I can't even access still.
I think you're right. I think it speaks to a much larger systemic issue too, in terms of accessibility to training. my daughter Tara Sky and Wasandio Kirby, who just graduated from the NTS, who followed you in your footsteps, also have some pretty incredible stories. I know that there's Renata Arluk, who went through U of A, has some pretty incredible stories about her time there. Lord Cardinal, I've had conversations about his time at U of A. That it could be a panel on itself, just in terms of how all of this actually starts in the training rooms,
Yeah.
and how then it manifests into our sense of worth, being invited into the rooms, or feeling that we have the right to be on some of these stages. And you bring up some really amazing points in terms of also how does the training in our institutions outside of organizations like the Center for Indigenous Theatre, how are Indigenous artists supported throughout the training process. So it's
Especially
a very
there's no
that you bring up. Yeah, and accessibility to resources in order to get there.
Yeah.
Which is the way that the band council funding works, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The economic stability on the reserves is just such a large conversation, and hint, hint, could be a panel unto itself. Just want to turn things over to Gord, because I know that you had thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Lisa and Jessica have been talking about, and appreciate that thing, because, you know, there's always the conversation of like, these are not our stories, and why are you trying to tell these stories and work in these ways? And these structures and these plays were created and written without people like us in mind, without nations, other nations coming in and trying to work within it. So it's been a lot of individual work for me to try and find myself in these works and in the way that this work happens, and try to be respectful and understanding, and at the same time not always feeling that respect and understanding back of the extra work that is being done. So I just want to like acknowledge and appreciate trying to reshape a mold that has been given to us. And we will talk about lots of people who have done this work before, who have broken molds. And again, we could talk about it forever, but I applaud the people that are here and lots of people before me who've been trying to do that.
And I truly do believe, sorry, I truly do believe that those circles being broken, that greater circle has much to gain and much to learn from our circle. And when I say that, I'm talking about the globe, and not just Caucasian people. I'm talking that our stories add to that circle something that is irreplaceable and extremely rare. And so there's a lot to be gained by them from us.
I've heard instead of colorblind casting, color rich casting as a term, in that in fact our influence makes the work richer. I'm going to go to Wilimi and then follow up with you, Cole.
Sure. I just wanted to add that I oscillate between doing what I call the work of, revitalizing the stories, revitalizing the language, the place names and story, creating the Indigenous teams. In the last project that I did for Skyborn, we had to create a whole system so that we could actually have Indigenous artists part of the team. So we had to create little pods, sort of like film pods, in order to have like a head sound designer that was in this like institutionalized way that we're trained of doing, and then actually have all of the Musqueam participants that I wanted in the room that knew our songs, that shared our songs, that actually had the art and the culture and what needed to be shared. And if we don't create that support system for that to actually happen, we're never going to have those people in the room. And the ego around if they even want to be part of the room. the ego around like, oh, are you really happy to be doing a theater show? It's like, no, this is my realm that I'm inviting you into. So you're a carver, you're a singer, you're a traditional singer. How can I change to be part of your world rather the other way around? And it takes a whole other like dismantling when we talk about like decolonizing theater and decolonizing the stage. And to me, that work is where my heart is. And so then when I get a call and it's like, hey, do you want to do a show at Stratford? I'm like, I don't know, do I? It's just like, I just don't know what the work is there. And when we go back to training, it's like, just gonna take a sip of water. When we go back to training, it's like, my background is from Studio 58. So it's like, Stratford is the penultimate, and it's like, if I've made it as an actor, I've made it at Stratford. So there's this feeling like, there's this conflict that often happens actually between being an Indigenous creator and doing the work and actually being an actor, being like, yeah, bring it on, let's go to Stratford, let's do this, and I'm continually figuring out that conflict because and then I go into the rooms in places like Stratford or Bard, and they're so far behind everything that we've been doing and all the work that we've been doing in order to, make Indigenous work. And then I go into these rooms in Stratford and Bard, and I'm in shock. And I actually don't even know how to like reconcile what I'm doing there.
And that's such a great point. We're gonna come back. We're gonna circle back to that, Willemia. Just want to turn things over to Cole. You wanted to talk to this as well.
Miigwech, I am definitely resonating with what folks are saying about the internalized racism in my family and how that operated, as far as the ways that, certainly in my theater school training, I was reading between the lines about my queerness or my ancestry not being welcome or being something that I shouldn't be bringing forward in the pursuit of that natural body or natural voice, like that type of specific conservatory breaking you down model towards this neutrality, which I think is just a more pleasant way of saying whiteness. And so certainly, picking up on what you were saying about color rich, like I definitely think about culturally conscious casting, that how can we be as artistic leaders inviting the artists we're engaging to bring all of themselves and all of their ancestors into these pieces, and how will that inform and open up these stories in ways that are fruitful and artful, as opposed to closing down and trying to force into a container that's maybe not natural. And maybe I'll share just a little story in relation to my family. My Métis grandma was raised by a residential school survivor who, in our family story, it was called a convent in South Dakota. And so assimilation is how she was raised. It was the tool that was taught for survival so that further children wouldn't be taken away. And so it is with that context that I understand and have come to a place of forgiveness when my Métis grandma would be someone who would redirect my feminine spirit or would encourage me to make subtle changes because my life will be easier. I understand those were acts of love that she came to, but certainly that that documentation that you read at the top of this question, Jani, speaks to the power of colonialism as something that's continuing to operate in the Canadian state. But I think it also identifies the power of art, that statement particularly tried to remove art. I think says that is where there is great potential for change, for a reclaiming. And certainly that's been happening for my mom and myself through art practice, finding a pride that my grandma was much more quiet about in her way. And maybe one more anecdote in relation to her. I was in a Christmas pageant on my knees at the edge of the stage singing a carol the way that one would in those times.
You have pictures? We want pictures.
And my friend Carrie was kneeling next to me, and she had a big singing voice, and so I felt like I could have a big singing voice next to her. And my grandma was in the audience, and she'd been to other Christmas carol concerts that her grandchildren had been in, and she pulled me aside to say that she can never hear her grandsons sing, but that she got to hear me sing, and that was really meaningful to her. So even in her assimilation and in her need for us to survive and thrive, I believe that she recognized the power of art in us as a way of being resilient.
Thank you so much, Cole. We were listening to Liz the other day talk about, and I love what you said, Gord, about the fact that artistic expression in Indigenous Inuit Métis communities, there was no separation between I'm an artist and I'm not an artist. It was as we were all just doing stuff that was creative, and that was really inherent to the fact that we're human beings. And the Industrial Revolution and the layering in of a colonial mindset to separate the artist from human is, I think one of the certainly the core issues that we deal with.
And the artist from community.
The artist from community, yeah. I'm sort of feeling this balance of trying to ensure that we get as much of our conversation and questions done, but I'm also trying not to push too hard. So just letting you know that I'm sort of feeling the balance of that. But I would like to move on if everyone is okay, because I think we have some pretty interesting and big issues to add to over the next little while before we close the circle with Liz. So I'd like to go on to it has to do with responsibility that we all feel in the room, that we have in the room. And this is the responsibility that we do have to our communities, whether we're separated from our communities or we've gone through internalized racism or genocide, internalized genocide, which is an expression that Monique Mojica shared with me years ago, that we have a responsibility to our communities to ensure that our stories, our songs, our images that belong to families, individuals, clans are protected. So our Indigenous laws, copyright laws, are different than the colonial white copyright laws. We're often, as I'm sure we've all experienced, the only one in the room. Or we're in the room with a number of us, but we're having to deal with non-Indigenous designers, or the guidelines of unions, or a history of naivety when it comes to appropriation. And so we carry this responsibility that a lot of other artists don't have. So my question to you is, how do we educate the industry that it's not business as usual? And Dean, would you like to talk to that?
Oh my gosh.
Just another little question.
Yeah, I mean, I know in 2002 when I was offered Ian Ross's play, this weighed very, very heavily, and so I did what I've always done, and I think what most of my family's always done, which is completely overcompensated. The Gaberys are, we're too everything. We're too big. We're too much. We're too loud. We're too angry. We're too everything. And there's a need to be over prepared to show that you deserve your spot. And so I had done some, really, really in-depth research into the history of the Underground Railroad being aided by the Ojibwe. And I gave stacks and stacks of paper, as colonial as that is, to all of my designers. And they they approached it with the gravitas and commitment that I had requested of them, you know, and I let them know how serious I took this responsibility, and that we had to share that responsibility, and so that it had to be authentic to the playwright and especially to dear Gregory Dominic Ojic. And so, you know, in our rehearsals, in our circle, we told everybody's story. And then those designers who were Joanne Dente and Lorenzo Savaini, both incredible. Lorenzo, he had to design 6 sets for the studio space for that one season. And he had designed all of the other sets, and I think I stopped him up with too much pressure. And but I was just so moved by how deeply he had taken this on. And then out of the blue, he called me up and said, like, can you come over right now? And I said, sure. And I got to his place on Ontario Street, and he showed me the studio theater model, you know, the little maquettes. And I mean, he was just wired, and he put down, grabbed these pebbles from the driveway as we went up the staircase. And then he put down a circle of stones and a circle of stones. And that was it. And because he wanted the play to happen a circle within a circle. And it was a moment where we literally, I was brought to tears because of his respect and understanding of what he had taken in, the information that he had taken in, and the honor that he approached that with, and delicacy, as did Joanne Dente with the costuming of Mr. Ojic. So, you know, my experience here was that, but again, you know, I brought that. It was not something that was given to us, and I don't, you know, so that was my journey.
Great, thank you so much, Dean. Gord, I'm gonna come to you, Wilimia, next, but I'm gonna just turn things over to Gord. I'm wondering, Gord, if you'd be willing to talk just about. So Renata Arluk, who was the director of the Breathing Hole, was brilliant in her ability to ensure that Inuit communities, representatives, both dramaturgically but also costume and design wise, were directly involved. And you know, you actually carried a lot of those props, Gord, and you held those in your hand, and you had that direct experience with the work that Renata was able to bring to the process at Stratford. And obviously I can't speak on Renata's behalf to what that process was, but we saw the result of it. And so my feeling is that she worked really hard to make that happen. And can you speak a little bit about how that felt and what that was for you in that process?
I could just touch on it a little bit. I mean, what we're talking about is cultural copyright, and that's the term that I like to use for it, and that idea that, you know, we should go to the source if we're going to get permission to use these things, and I applaud the. I mean, one of the things that I have to do in my job a lot is represent other nations and other cultures, and I want to do that justice. As an actor, all I can do is represent, but I try to represent with as much understanding and input that I can get. And with the consultants that were brought in to create the spheres, to create a lot of the things that we would use, I can't help but thank them for giving me something to hold on to represent, to create my representation of an entirely different culture than myself. It is daunting when I try to do that, because because the history of misrepresentation has done so much damage, and it goes back to what Cole was saying about the power of the art. The power of the art has done so much damage to people like us because of the misrepresentation and the appropriation and the assimilation, that it's nice to see a consultant giving you something to use as power to represent them to a larger audience.
Thank you so much, Gord. Willemia, I know that you've had some very large experiences around this issue, and I know and would like to preface that by saying that we hope that we're in a safe space. We've asked our listening audience with some beautiful words that Michaela has created, that as we enter into this experience of vulnerability, witnessing, responding, and digesting, may we lead with our kindest selves and our most patient selves, for this process is bound to move and shift energy. So I just wanted to preface that by saying that, I'm certainly aware of some of the challenges that you've had around this issue, and leave it to you in terms of whether you feel the safety in order to speak about those issues at this time.
Yeah, thank you for that. First of all, I want to say that I really appreciate that. And I appreciate you and Liz holding the space for these conversations to begin. It's a very vulnerable thing for me to talk about. What Gord is talking about is the complete opposite from what I experienced at the exact same time in another show. I'll be very clear and honest about it. It was the Ndo-Mshkawgaabwimi incident. And in that play, the idea was for an Indigenous woman to play the MC or the colonizer. The MC switches back and forth and embodies a colonizer character in the piece. And while that idea was very intriguing to me and exciting as an actor, as the process went on, I had a sinking feeling that none of it had been thought through. That care hadn't been taken to understand what that narrative actually is and what it actually means to ask an Indigenous woman to embody a colonizer in what I would say is a white supremacist institution in Canada. That's to begin with. As there were many opportunities to explore that narrative. I was flown out to Toronto at one point for a workshop, and I had thought, oh, okay, here's when we're going to dive into what this means. And to give a little context, the Ndo-Mshkawgaabwimi incident was written in the 70s, right? So it's already a piece that's been written. So you're asking, by this, and we're talking about when we're bringing up colorblind casting or color sensitive casting, I mean, it's the same realm of being like, okay, now we're going to insert an Indigenous woman into a role that is normally played by a white male.
So it becomes a directorial concept.
It becomes a directorial concept, and you can't change the writing that is the piece itself. So there needs to be work to be done to understand how to support that narrative, how to create that narrative. And so briefly, there's a lot to unpack here, so I'm trying to be honest and concise at the same time. I was flown to Toronto, and I thought, oh, this is the beginning of that process. And what we ended up exploring were the shadow puppets in the piece. And I sat in the corner of the room pretty much the whole time watching the shadow play happen, because that had nothing to do with me in the piece. Fast forward to starting to discuss the costume and the drawings that were shown to me. I was wearing a Métis sash. And I said, well, why is this character Métis? And there were some issues because I know originally Michaela was going to play the part. So I think they were going in that direction. And I said, well, I understand that maybe that's why it was starting to head in that direction, but like, okay, let's look at this now. The Ndo-Mshkawgaabwimi arrives to Vancouver, and they were just lucky to be able to have an Indigenous actor from Vancouver. And I said, you know, if the Indigenous person who would be there, I was supposed to be this support, this connection to the people who were not allowed to land on my land. And I said it would be a Musqueam, Squamish, or Tsleil-Waututh person. There was no understanding about that whatsoever, and no preparation for that whatsoever. And I ended up having to have numerous consultations, unpaid consultations, where I had to teach people how my people dress, with, you know, pictures, ideas. I was basically costume designing the show. At one point, and these consultations I did bring it up before the process happened. And this is to say that do the work months beforehand. So now we're in rehearsal and none of this is still done. They began to struggle with the costume. They couldn't create the costume properly. So I said, okay, fine. I will offer you my regalia because this representation is so important to me. And this is going back to, I am not only an actor at Stratford, I'm representing my whole community, my whole culture. If this regalia and the way that we dress is not proper, it lands on me. So we shipped my regalia from Vancouver, and then my regalia was completely dishonored. It arrived in the costume department, and the head of costumes began to barter with me over the cost of my costume. I hadn't even brought up the cost of the rental. And I said to her, it would have been nicer if you just bought me a gift certificate for a dinner and some flowers. And our culture was like, you know, it would have been kinder to just, you know, give from your heart back, because it was a generous gift that I was sharing. Props. I had to design the prop as well too, because they wanted an authentic Musqueam staff. Because they hadn't done any of the work, I had to then get permission from my community to do this. And I'm saying all of this, that this is all during rehearsal when I'm playing a quote unquote leading role, where I need to get off book. I need to understand my character, which has not been thought through whatsoever. And yet here I am helping props, design the props, get permission. And it got to the point where I was actually hounded. Have you gotten permission yet? Have you gotten permission yet? Have you talked to your auntie yet? And what was I supposed to say to my auntie? I didn't even know what was going on. I didn't even know if the situation I was in deserved that permission. And yet I'm being asked to ask somebody that I respect for permission. Music. Previews, the music finally arrived and it sounded like it was out of a Disney movie. I sat with the sound designer, and gave them the direction of some wonderful singers from my community. I guarantee you, and I apologize for this publicly, that those musicians were not compensated. And I want to say publicly, like, thank you that those voices were there, because I wouldn't have been able to get through the show without hearing them singing and without them there with me. And all of this is happening, my first experience at Stratford. And when I go back to when you talk about our training, you talk about wanting to, you know, succeed and do well in our job. And this is my opportunity to do that. And yet I have to hold all of this and there's so many emotions around it, but what I want to say is, and this is what helps me when Liz is guiding this circle, what will bring me peace with this situation and what can change? So I asked the question, if there was a knowledge keeper at Stratford, what happened? Why wasn't it implemented? Why did all of these things go wrong when there has been said that there's a process, that there have been teachings and learnings around how not to do this, and yet it trickled down to this very production and none of it was implemented. And on top of that, the emotional capacity that I had to have to even do the role, I didn't have any support in. And I say that again, that an Indigenous woman was embodying a colonizer. And I just don't think that landed with anybody, you know?
I want to thank you so much, Wilimia, for having the courage to speak your truth. That's what we're here for. I just want to ask Liz if Liz, would you like to respond now, or would you like to wait till the end of the circle to add your thoughts to what's just been said?
I might just very briefly applaud the spirit that has been shared in the last few moments. To me, it's the truth. Truth is not as simple as we always believe it is, and it's not just conversation. When I feel movement in my spirit from the storytelling of what a person's experience has been, and when I feel that, to me, I've understood what her soul is saying. When I see tears, I know it's soul talking. And that's Dabwewin. That's the truth. And we should be very proud that we have not lost the gift, that we have not been disconnected from all of those gifts and senses that the Creator has given us, because that's what makes us truly storytellers, so that our history and our struggles and the barriers that we have encountered, to demonstrate openly what that feels like, what it looks like, is very important to the process of people understanding and to bring about change. Neil, that's it.
Gwitch, thank you so much, Liz. I think this is actually a really good segue then into, I'm going to jump forward because we had so many ideas we're not going to get to. I'm just going to let everybody know it's so many things that we identified that we wanted to address, we wanted to talk about, and we're not going to get there by the end of our 2 hours. This is, as I said before, a conversation that's been going on for years and years and years and years. We've either tried to bring these issues forward and not been heard, or people politely nodded and acted as though they were listening, but they really weren't listening, or we shared these amongst ourselves only for the safety of our own health. But it does come down to, I think, the question about whose responsibility is it to decolonize or / what we call indigenize the space. And what does that mean? So this is the question that I'd like to sort of turn over to the panel. So how can we integrate Indigenous theater practice and acts of decolonization and indigenization into what we call PWIs? My friend Rihanna Yazzie calls PWIs, which is predominantly white institutions, and Western theater practice, in order to ensure that theater spaces are welcoming and safe for Indigenous artists. So some of the things that I'd like to maybe throw out there in terms of the things that we can address here are dissolving nepotism. So if there has been requests repeatedly over a number of years to leadership and we haven't been heard, what does that mean? What does it mean that only now, after years of being asking, or only now after a long time of saying, could you deal with this? Only now the lid has blown off the boiling pot of water that's been on the stove for a long, long time. Are we hearing promises of change? I want to maybe talk about smudging in the spaces. This is not just a Stratford issue. It's an issue for not all Indigenous people. Not all Métis, Indigenous First Nations people smudge, but it is certainly part of a spiritual practice that we like to bring into the room. So I'd like to talk about those. Before I preface that, though, I will say that we have gotten word that after, and some great stories from Gord and Dean, hopefully, that they will share around smudging, because they're not funny, but there's some humorous ways that they're looked at. That Stratford has made the commitment as of this 2020 season that smudging will be 100% invited into any space in Stratford. So I just want to publicly thank all of those of you who worked diligently to address this issue with Stratford, to bring it forward, and to say that Stratford has made the 100% commitment to make this happen. It would have happened in the 2020 season. And now we know it will happen in the 21 season. Knock on wood that will happen. The 21 season will happen. But anyway, I want to turn things over to this very large discussion to Lisa, who I know has some thoughts on this very large topic as well.
Right. Yeah. In terms of, I guess Jessica said something earlier about just listening. Listening for me is the most important thing others can do who aren't Indigenous, in order to just take it all in, but actually listen. There's a difference between watching and listening, and listening with your eyes open and your ears open. I think acceptance is very important, which I feel is changing and is progressing. Also, it's just important for everyone who is in theater spaces knowing that it is a multicultural space. It isn't just one hierarchy that is making all the choices. We're all in it together, and that's the point. So just like smudging and all those and land acknowledgements, I found myself kind of the spokesperson for land acknowledgements at some points. There was one point I was just about to do a show, and a director approached me and said, "Did you want to do the land acknowledgement? Here it is on paper. You can read it." And I had the opening monologue, so it was very awkward and didn't make sense for me to be that person. But it's because I was the Indigenous person in the room that it became my responsibility. And at the time, I didn't really know if I could say no. I thought it was expected of me, and that positive person inside of me was like, yes, I want to do this. But it should be something that everyone, it's a communal agreement, and it's all of our voices coming out to acknowledge where we are and where this play is resting and playing, essentially. I've had positive experiences with being an Indigenous person in the room. Wonderful artists that I have worked with, so uplifting and wanting to listen and curious. And then others I would be wearing braids in a rehearsal room, and someone would say that I looked like a real Indian, which was a very odd statement to me because I am one, a real Indigenous person. So it's just about not taking up the space and allowing those who are Indigenous, and it's also important to understand that when an Indigenous person is in the room, they feel that sense of responsibility and they have slight fear of saying something wrong or not being respectful to a certain nation that isn't theirs, and they're expected to know everything. So it's about knowing that for Indigenous people, our culture has been progressively kind of put away, and some of it is gone forever. So we're still learning too. And yeah, just, there needs to be, the root of everything is just learning from each other. And I think that's all we can do.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I'm going to turn to you soon, Dean, but I'm going to just ask Gordon to speak about this issue first. It's not an issue, a context subject.
Yeah, and I appreciate it, and I will try and be brief and concise as I tell a story. I want to echo what Lisa was just saying about, trying to rediscover our own culture and our own ideas, and people desperately wanting us to share, and just trying. Well, we need to rediscover it ourselves. So I've been on a journey to rediscover smudging for several number of years right now, and I try and bring it into my practice in theater. I want to smudge before previews and shows, and there's been several theaters beforehand that I haven't that would not allow me to smudge in their space, would ask me to go outside to do it beforehand. And there's any number of reasons, from fire regulations to not worrying that it might smell like drugs. And these kind of misunderstandings are the things that we'd run into. But when I came to the Stratford Festival, I went to them as soon as possible to say, I'd like to smudge before shows. And their response was, oh, no one has ever asked me this before. I'm sorry, I have several stupid questions. And we had a dialogue. I did presentations to several groups of people, and the final result was I would be allowed to smudge. We had to find some scheduling time. I cannot thank the coaching staff enough to help find that time, because time is an issue in scheduling in terms of doing a show here at the festival. But we found a time. But I was followed everywhere I went by a giant blue shop vac on wheels that the responsibility fell to the stage management to, when I was finished smudging, to turn it on, to take out any. I would call the device the Recolonizer 2000, and I continued to call the device the Recolonizer 2000 in conversations with Anthony and Anita and everybody that I spoke. I refused to call it anything but the Recolonizer 2000 to try and take the Indigenous out of the room.
And just to be clear, it was an air purifier.
Yeah.
The function of the machine was purifying the air. And it's something that didn't work, as we are trying to purify the air ourselves. I mean, I've had people apologizing to me about it as they had to turn it on. I had some really good interactions with some people worrying that it might damage costumes, to the same people coming to me asking me, is it okay if I join you? I feel like it might, would that be all right? I feel a great responsibility of trying to share medicine. I offered it to anybody else that was in my cast in the building, if they had the time to come and join me. I feel that weight and responsibility as somebody who is trying to rediscover it myself, but I felt the need to share it. It took 3 years before they realized that the Recolonizer 2000 was not necessary. I appreciate that they've come to that conclusion. I patiently waited for them to come to that conclusion. As opposed to arguing it, I let it happen, absolutely knowing that people would come to the conclusion that
this is not necessary. You're just making room for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ask you, Gord, did they stop using the recolonizer?
This year, last year, I had an ASM coming to me in the room going like, I'm sorry, I don't know where the recolonizer is. I don't know where it is. And I went, I actually just got word that they don't want it anymore. They don't need to use it anymore.
Dean,
And that stage manager went, yay, great.
Thank you so much. I saw you smile, Dean, when Gord said that he had been asking permission, because I know that you have a history of smudging at Stratford that goes.
Yeah, I am. Again, I started to rediscover the medicines in my late 20s, and it's always something that was very private in my before I went to rehearsal, when I came home from rehearsal, that kind of thing. But of course, with Ian Ross's play, it was different, and I just didn't ask, and that's the nature of I didn't ask. I don't even think I was really worried, but we were our own little pirate ship because my actors did not feather into other Stratford productions. And we had our own space. So I had a copy of the traditional teachings that was there with us every day, and my smudge. And we had our own little drawers. And it just started the first day, and we just continued. And I don't know whether, we had a stage manager that was not, she was brought in to do the show. She was from BC. She was very open to all of the teachings and had encountered them before. Leon Pownell, who was a kind of an old Stratford actor, who I brought back to the festival. He'd been doing work in prisons in BC, so he knew and respected the ceremony. And so we just did it. And our production stage manager, Michael Hart, I don't know if he knew, I really don't. And I don't know if somebody said, hey, should we stop this or something? But it was never, ever, ever approached. And there was a lot of smudging going on because that show needed a lot of smudging. But the best was, at that time, there was no keypads or anything at the festival. It was still a doorman or a door person at the stage door. So you were basically allowed in the festival buildings any time of the day or night if you wanted to go and rehearse or work, or Michael Terrio would work until 3 a.m. or something, but you really felt again like a security in that circle and so on. So I just the studio was finished. It had been done, and I guess maybe about 9:30 at night, I just went and said I'd just like to go and sit in the space, and I just went in and I smudged every inch of that space, every vom, backstage, the dressing rooms, and then left and went home and felt good. And but it had never ever been an issue because I never really asked. And now I feel that I could have and should have perhaps opened a door there all these years later. I had, but of course would never have thought that there would be a decolonizer in the room. So that was my experience with it. But that smudge was going a lot, as everybody in that production knows.
The other reason why we as a circle thought that it would be helpful to have Dean on the panel, because he's had such a long intersection with Stratford and these stories that that none of us who have been there recently were even connected to. I do want to say too that I think it's worth a shout out that it was actually Dean who created the Michael Langham classical workshop. Sorry.
Langham classical workshop for classical theater direction. It was myself and David Latham, and with the eternal support of Bonnie Green. But yes, it came from that trip that I spoke about earlier, where Richard had sent us over. He was looking for a director's program, and at that time we could not fulfill it. But in 2010 it started, and it was really a way. It was my intention coming from Indy that it would accomplish two things, if I may. just, the first was what the world stage had done in 2000 for me, which was to connect the country from coast to coast to coast and bring artists of all different backgrounds together, and which had turned out to be incredible for us as we went on in our careers. And then also just to give independent theater directors and up-and-comers or emerging directors or established emerging directors a space here to deal with scale and to deal with the toys. As young directors, you just don't get exposed to that unless you're in these kinds of institutions. And I wanted other people to have the opportunity that was given to me by Anthony and Richard and Des. So that was really kind of my motivation.
And was successful in terms of tying things together here, the program that Jessica went through. And she does have stories around that. So I'm going to move forward. I am aware of time. We only have about 10 more minutes before I want to turn things over to Liz to close the circle. As I said, there's many, many more things that we would have liked to discuss today. This is a very large conversation. So I'd like to end with this very large question, which is to speak or not to speak. We've been alluding to that along the conversation as we've been disclosing and talking, and the cost, as we saw with Wilemia's story, the cost that we experience in terms of speaking up. So just going to suggest that at the heart of gaslighting, which certainly is a buzzword that we've heard a lot of recently, is the fact that individuals are often shamed for speaking up. They're made to believe that they have no rational reason for the way that they feel, or that they shouldn't believe what they feel. Dean the other day pointed out that stiff upper lip has a very specific connotation in terms of, and an attribute to British people in remaining resolute and unemotional when faced with adversity, and that we've often been told, all of us, just get over it in terms of moving forward. So many artists during the creative process are expected to, what I'll say, suck it up. And this happens from our national training institutions, where we're asked to leave our indigeneity at the door, to rehearsal halls. And as a result, if we do speak up, we gain a reputation for being difficult to deal with, which of course is a career killer in the mainstream industry, not within our own indie industry. So where do you, as artists, draw the line? When do you speak? When do you remain silent? And what is your tipping point? And I'd love to turn to Cole for this, if you would, Cole, first.
Thank you much for that. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak to it because it feels relevant in regards to one of the ways that I'm aware of my whiteness and my maleness, and the ways that that privilege operates, that makes it possible for me to be able to play in certain rooms. People listen to me differently when I speak. And I just want to name that this panel, I think, is a real snapshot of where Stratford's at with who they are engaging with currently. And I have an expectation that Stratford will continue to develop and maintain relationships with Indigenous communities, so that those who are closer to their culture and their communities have the same opportunities to be on these stages if they choose and if they desire. Thinking back to what you were saying in the previous question about responsibility, I'm remembering how Anthony was speaking at, I believe it was the Indigenous Directors Lab. He was walking me through culture shifts within the festival in regards to European actors in the early days having the lead roles, and that eventually Canadian actors were seen as valid and warranting of those roles, and eventually even Canadian actors using Canadian accents were welcome. And so I guess my expectation in being on this panel and certainly seeing the current events where it's very transparent the way in which Black and Indigenous lives are devalued across Turtle Island, that and the actions that organizations like this and many others are taking and are making. my expectation is that the follow through continues beyond the black squares and the performances of allyship and accomplishing, but that, to answer your original question, when do I speak? I speak as often as I can as a way of mitigating that I get to be in these spaces, particularly when it's scary, particularly when it's hard, because there are others that don't have the same access that I do. And so I put it to Stratford and to other national arts organizations that I'm thinking of Phelan Johnson, a Mohawk Tuscarora artist. We got to work on the Goswenta gathering at Soulpepper recently, and Goswenta is the two-row wampum. It is a treaty between the Haudenosaunee and the Dutch, and it requires that these two vessels, Indigenous and settler, continue side by side without interfering with each other. And as we've heard on this panel, and as we know, interference has happened, is happening, and continues to happen. And so an expectation that I have is for myself to speak and to push when I can. And for institutions like Stratford, I want to say in 5 years that the programming that currently exists is in one of those streams, but that 50% of their programming be Indigenous, Black, and people of color and culturally diverse people led, telling their own stories in their own ways. That these are foundational treaties for what makes up Canada. And it is my expectation.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Cole. I'd like to pass things over to Jessica. I know that if you, again, in a similar vein as to offering space to Wilimia, if you feel safe to speak about some of your experiences as you were, in fact, in Dean and David's program, the Michael Langham Director's Workshop for Classical Theatre. Would you like to speak to those experiences now? Do you feel comfortable with doing that?
I do. I mean, I really need to Cole and everyone for saying when's the time to speak now when you're afraid and it's hard. It is hard. And I see Wilimia and, all of us. And I think through the experience that I had, some of the experiences are something I'd like to touch upon. There were people I saw and that we've talked in back alleys and on, lawns about what happened. But I think it's important to see them. Like Lisa was saying, I saw them with open eyes. And I would like to share some words about it. And Janny cut me off, I know. But I'm going to refer back to a few notes as I talk and not just because I am nervous. And so one of the things I've been thinking about a lot, again, is back to safe and unsafe environments, and reflecting on this moment and resonating with what E.B. Smith beautifully shared since the Black Like Me panel as a provocation. Can we really see the toxic and deadly rooms we find ourselves in? And what does a room look like as its opposite? Which for me, and I think everyone here has been talking about, is about those grandmother teachings of love, courage, respect, honesty, wisdom, humility, truth, also slowness, silence, but also speaking, witnessing, kindness, really establishing what it means to, when people are leading a room, and I think this specifically talks about, for me, directing and directors there, do we really consider our words like collaboration or sensitivity? Liz brought up to us as well. Do we know what those words are? They're not empty words. Can you really point to what that means in your practice and live by it? And again, this, just before I share an experience, it just makes me think again about what it means to value, again, a relationship between me and you. And I don't always see that happening. And that's what hurts a lot. And what I've seen in the past is there's no value between people in a room. And my dear friend Cher Lichter put me in a workshop this week with Odyssey Works, which is a company in America. And one of their main mandates is about empathy. And I've been thinking about that a lot. Something that struck me in the workshop was them talking about, how do we build my gift to you? How do I think about the gift of being with somebody else? That's something between us, me and you, Janny, me and you, Wilimia, Michaela, when we're on the Res Sisters, what is our value? And I consider that as my intention, always. And I've witnessed firsthand some environments where I don't know if that's really what's being led in the environment. And I think I'm just going to share a couple things, not all. I have been told to get over it by a person in power in a rehearsal hall regarding my voiced concern for some other female artists in a Stratford production. Bravely, like Olympia, I'll say that it was the Inuit. And these women were offended by the blatant misogyny in the play's dialogue, especially the ending moment where the white male actor's character survived the play's action while the rest of the many artists of color character did not. And he was introduced to the new land, and his response when he thanked the nondescript Indigenous character that he was there, he said, "I'm here myself, Aeneas, my son by name, and a woman." And the woman had no name, but she was played by an actress whose character had a name. And the women in the room, when the scene was ever being run, they would be singing under their breath, "And a woman, and a woman." And it felt really uncomfortable. They were uncomfortable, and that was their way of expressing it, singing under their breath, "and a woman." So I shared this concern, and when I was shared exactly what I was seeing, I was told to get over it to my face. My response was in the moment, "No, sir, I won't get over it, nor will these women in the cast singing under their breath, and I suspect nor will the female audience members who are going to come see this show." And I walked away pretty shaken. I thought that's probably it for me in the room. And I wasn't invited to any meetings afterwards regarding the process, really. There were obviously other people that were supporting me, like Bonnie Green and David Latham, who were lovely. But it seemed to be always told that there was an oversight or someone just forgot to put me on an email thread at points after that. That same production, I witnessed a lecture on refugees and migration given to the same cast who were not consulted about sharing their voices on the real lived personal experiences they might have regarding migration. None of the cast were engaged to respond in that conversation, nor prior even asked if they had personal stories they would want to share, which I knew some did. I watched in that particular rehearsal hall a cast member told to act more street. I saw the room physically shift uncomfortably, all of us in discomfort, knowing immediately this is not okay, but we don't know what to do. How do we come to this actor's defense? I thought, what kind of broken, excuse my language, fucked up system am I complicit in this moment? I didn't sign up for this. And then this particular production, days after, I was called by a lot of the cast members to a meeting at a bar to discuss the racial injustices and the unfortunate non-listening that was happening in the hall. And this discussion led me to being asked to write a letter on behalf of the whole cast to share what I had witnessed and submit it to the powers that be at the festival. It's a very moving and vulnerable conversation, which I also asked to them, would it be more strong during that conversation if we wrote it together? And we discussed, I think, thoughtfully the pros and cons of both. That I was willing to throw myself under the bus, which, if anyone knows me, I'm happy to do that because I was seeing what was going on. But also we thought, right, you're just low on the hierarchy. So does that have any value, or people are going to read your letter and just say, "Oh, she's being vindictive. Who's that? Oh, by the way, we don't even know who that is." Versus, the cast collectively writing something and then all of them considering that they would not be asked back next season. So this conversation, to me, why I'm sharing it is that it revealed our collective anxiety and a sense of frustration of not knowing who we could trust, where we could speak. We could speak to each other. It also revealed, therefore, that there was a blatant power imbalance and how unsafe that made each and every one of us voicing our discomfort from my personal opinion, what I felt witnessing it. And I think about that conversation. I shared it obviously with some people here in private. I think about it a lot. I think about it and I share it with my students at the university often as a way with my directing students to say, I don't know if this conversation should ever have happened. It should never have taken place. I'm glad it did with these people because, they know who they are. And I don't want to do, out everyone, but we were there and I felt like it was a very good conversation, very emotional about the inequality that was being held up at the festival and what could we do to change it. We didn't come to any conclusion from that conversation, unfortunately. we walked away and just agreed that we would try and people would voice things when they came up in the room. And that haunts me, you know, because I just think those traumas have been carried as anecdotes for the future and as warnings, and that's not good enough. And I just wonder, therefore, you know, how can we have rooms of care and kindness and deep respect and empathy? And that's what I took from that conversation going forward. So how can we truly examine, you know, these words like sensitivity? Do people actually lead by them? Do I lead by them? I'll put myself there too. Do we know what they mean? Do we talk about them? You know, people want to use those words on the first day of rehearsal, but then that's it. There's no accountability afterwards. It's just, you know, well, just do the scene and be comfortable. You know, I will, you know, maybe your discomfort, you'll get over that. And I think, you know, for me, I really want to examine how we put policies in place that say, you know, if someone is in the room is a racist or a transphobic or, you know, a misogynist, you know, how do we come forward with that legitimate concern and have it taken seriously and not have to go through a bunch of paperwork or be afraid of our livelihoods? And that we actually use that transparent language, because we're not using it. You know, we're afraid to use it. And these instances, they take place and they're uncomfortable, especially when nepotism is involved, or we think that nepotism is involved, or greed is involved, or ego is involved, and we don't know how to address it. And we're low on the hierarchy pole. And so we think, you know, there's a power imbalance and I can't say anything. And I'm saying something now. I certainly have said it since, you know, but I think that's something that I hope is taken up considerably going forward for everyone, you know, whether at this institution, even at my own institution, you know, there's so many problems at university level, and to take it really seriously that when there's racism in the room, misogyny, transphobia, homophobia, a bully, a liar, you know, that we try to think about what's the response, especially when you're told to get over it, or worse, after that, you're pushed out, you're banished, you're lied about to your community. There's backdoor backstabbing that's happening. You know, I've experienced that, where you are being judged and no one's even asked you actually what happened. If that's the response to someone taking initiative to having a discussion when they can about legitimate concern, I wonder what can be done. And I think it is a vetting process potentially. How are we really assessing how these rooms are being assembled?
Thank you so much, Jessica. I know that was really quite incredible for you to speak to. So I am aware of the fact that we are running out of time. I wanted to just say that there were, again, many things that we had wanted to discuss here. We wanted to address racial capitalism, or what we call racial capitalism, which is when predominantly white organizations, so I'm just going to look at my notes because I'm like, yeah, I don't have my glasses on. Shoot. Predominantly white organizations and individuals use us to acquire social and economic value. I think we've all been put in that position every now and then, where we're asked to be the cultural consultants in the room, whether we're qualified for that or not. Do we take up that position? Do we not? We wanted to speak about what we call code switching. All these are all really incredible sort of new buzzwords that have been coming up. But, you know, when do Indigenous people change how they relate to the table they're sitting at in order to be heard, in order to gain the respect? It's a very difficult position to be put into. We were going to talk about defining allyship, or a new word that Carmen Inquire uses, which is accomplice. And we wanted to end off with stories of resilience, which we will not have a chance to get to, because I think one of the most really amazing things about Indigenous artists is that despite all of these things that have been happening, despite the situations that we constantly have been put in, despite the circumstances that we've had to, our ancestors going through residential schools, going through training institutions, all of that have great stories of resilience. And it's that should be and can be celebrated, that has brought us to the fact that when those stories and songs were outlawed and punishable by death, it was the grandmothers and the grandfathers. It was the grandmothers who held those babies in their arms and whispered the stories and the songs to them to ensure that those stories and those teachings would be held and carried in and embodied moving forward, which is a beautiful image. that Sonny Morano shared with me years and years ago. I want to reiterate that we have a Gmail address. Should you have questions, concerns, comments, you can not only put them in the chat form here, but also email stagingourtruth@gmail.com. Those questions, concerns, and thoughts will be collated anonymously and used as a vehicle for further discussion at Stratford. So please send us your information, send us your questions, send us your comments, your concerns. I want to again address the fact that there were so many incredible Indigenous artists that should have been on this panel. There are so many incredible Indigenous, Inuit, Métis designers, dancers, people, artists from Quebec, artists from Manitoba, artists from various provinces that are not, and territories that are not represented here. Our humble apologies for not being able to make space for you. We kept it to our Sacred Seven for a number of reasons. We kept it to the 2010-20 season to give us some guidelines, but our humble apologies for not being able to include you, but your voice is still important. So Twitter, spread the Facebook postings that have been shared. Let's spread the, the incredible photos of all our very talented Indigenous artists. Send us your comments and your questions, and those will be addressed, those will be answered and collated and brought forward. And we do have 100% commitment from Stratford that this is not the end of the conversation. Your voice will be a part of that moving forward. And to Cole's point, there will be others that will be involved in the conversation representing a variety of disciplines and a variety of communities. So I just wanted to reiterate that really tough decisions needed to be made, but we recognize that that those decisions feel like some of you were not included in the conversation. And we just want to make sure that you understand that that was not our intention whatsoever. I want to end with a shout out also to Stratford, the Tom Patterson, which is just gone through an incredible renovation, is celebrating the artistry of Les Harper. His mural will be included. I know that he's working in tandem with another artist, and I'm sorry, but I can't remember his name at the moment. Romy will be celebrated and included in the design at the Tom Patterson. So thank you to Stratford for that commitment in terms of an artistic presence in the room, in the new theater, the design of the new theater. And to all of the Stratford staff who helped us, the Circle, over this last week. It was a tremendous job. I need to turn things over to Liz. We started a little bit late. I want to make sure that Liz has some time to end our Circle, but thank you so much for joining us. And again, let's continue this really important conversation that's just a stepping stone from those who have come before us. Sorry, I am going to say that, sorry, I do have to do this, and that is that there are many that came before us. There is August Schellenberg, Chief Yalachi, Chanina Redfeather, Esther Deer, Maria Campbell, Margot Kane, Tantu Cardinal, Gordon Tutusis, Spider Woman Theater, James Bullard. The list goes on and on and on and on. A shout out to Jay Silverheels, who in Hollywood went to bat for artists all over so that they could actually have a change room to change in while on location. So there has been incredible work done by our predecessors. The list is too long to mention, but Chimigwech to all of those whose shoulders we stand on. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I'd like to turn things over to Liz now to close the Circle with some final comments.
Miigwech. In closing, I would like to look at the Circle that we formed today, and did we accomplish what we accomplish as Indigenous people when we form a Circle. And in that strength of the Circle, we talked about the theme today was Ndo-Mshkawgaabwimi. Did we all stand strong? And I believe that with the circle, we've attempted to show how we try to create in our own teachings the safe environment, how we create that safety. And we recognize equality, we recognize that we belong, and that we listen to one another. We give each other that respect in time, and that we always demonstrate in an active way our traditions and our values, no matter what forum that we're in. We've opened our hearts, and we are asking for understanding. And we ask at the beginning of the day for the Creator, for the grandmothers and the grandfathers and the spirits of the four directions to be with us, to give us guidance, and to give guidance to the Stratford Festival, and understanding now what messages and changes and things that they can be implemented, and to invite people in to help them, to support them, to develop that, what we are going to have in our future and for the future of the artists. And so I think we asked for all of that, how we were going to be making changes in a good way. So I think these Creator and the grandmothers and grandfathers have heard this message. And now for those people who've listened, how can they make a better future? And has the knowledge which you've shared as the panelists, the skills that you've demonstrated, have they contributed to the an understanding now that will perhaps change that cultural lens that we wear on a day-to-day basis? You've heard very courageous stories, and it's not easy to share our inner spirits, but we have done in a quiet and in a respectful way. And so we ask you to make a decision of what it is that you will take away from today, and put it in as gifts and intentions to change. And bottom line, what actions are we going to take to make a better life? In closing, I wish all of the participants a very safe travel home, and to be good to each other, to be not afraid to ask when you go home with your families today, and for support, for recognizing that when we give of ourselves, our spirits are met sometimes with that resistance to hide, to be silent, to be perhaps revisiting fears. And but we had a journey today, Ndo-Mshkawgaabwimi. So you have to ask yourself, did we all stand strong? And yes, we did. And I thank you for the opportunity. And now it's just our worldview that has been expressed, and hopefully Stratford and all of those listeners will understand what the story was. Miigwech.
Miigwech, everyone. Thank you for listening.
Pikawabmin.